The only restriction California puts on it is that they can't be paid per ballot.
Accusations of an illegal election overhaul.
Something unusual is happening in California, and depending on who you ask, it's either a 5-alarm warning about the integrity of American elections, or it's the same playbook we've seen before, dressed up in new headlines. President Trump is sounding the alarm, loudly, repeatedly. Multiple posts, comments to reporters, and now federal investigators have stepped in. California's top officials are pushing back just as hard, calling the claims baseless, unhinged, and dangerous. So what's actually true here? What's disputed? What's been proven? What hasn't? And why does any of this matter for every American watching the midterms get closer? This video is going to walk through the full timeline, the claims on both sides, the legal fight hiding underneath the headlines, and what election experts are actually warning about. No shortcuts. Let's get into it. What actually happened? Let's start with the plain facts, laid out as clearly as possible, before any spin gets added. On June 2nd, California held its statewide primary elections. 2 races drew the most national attention: a closely contested race for governor and a high-profile primary for mayor of Los Angeles. As is standard procedure in California, the count did not finish on election night. That's not a glitch. It's how the system is designed to work. California allows mail ballots that are postmarked by Election Day to be counted as long as they arrive within 7 days afterward. That rule has been on the books for years. It's not new, and it's not unique to this election. In the 2022 Los Angeles mayoral race, the winner, Karen Bass, wasn't officially declared until 8 days after Election Day. Nobody called that a stolen election at the time. But this year, with ballots still being processed, President Trump began posting on Truth Social, accusing Democrats of trying to, in his words, steal both the governor's race and the LA mayoral primary. Over a series of posts, he claimed there was, quote, paraphrased, big cheating happening, that mail-in ballots were showing up in suspicious numbers overnight, and that the slow pace of the count was itself proof that something was wrong. He also said the vote was under investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, and asked publicly why the count was taking so long. Those are serious accusations, made by a sitting president, about a presidential-adjacent state election system. So the very next question has to be, what's backing them up? The evidence question. This is where the story gets complicated, and where it's worth slowing down to be precise, because the loudest claims and the actual documented record are not always the same thing. Multiple news organizations, including ABC News and NPR, reported that when the White House was directly asked for evidence supporting the president's fraud claims, none was provided. California's Secretary of State, Shirley Weber, has said for months consistently, well before this controversy, that a slower count is normal and expected. Her office has explained that on election night, the public typically gets a good picture of most races, but final certified results can take weeks. That's been true under Republican and Democratic administrations alike for years, because it's a function of population size and mail ballot volume, not partisanship. California's Attorney General, Rob Bonta, went further than just calling the timeline normal. He directly rejected the fraud allegations, describing them in blunt terms, quote, paraphrased as truly embarrassing, unhinged, and dangerous. He pointed out that every count, recount, hand count, and audit in California's history has failed to turn up evidence of widespread voter fraud. Bonta also raised a specific example of the kind of misinformation circulating around this election. A candidate for LA-mayor reportedly suggested that some votes counted for his opponent may have come from homeless individuals, a claim made without supporting evidence. Bonta called that kind of rhetoric irresponsible and dangerous, especially when spread without any critical examination. Now, to be fair to the other side of this, because a fair video has to be fair to both sides, a federal prosecutor in the Central District of California did confirm, on the record, that his office, along with the FBI, opened what he called, quote, paraphrased, multiple election fraud investigations tied to California's elections. That's real. That's documented. That's not something invented by Trump or his supporters, a sitting assistant U.S. attorney said it publicly. But here's the distinction that matters, and it's the single most important sentence in this entire video. Opening an investigation is not the same thing as finding evidence. Investigations get opened constantly, based on tips, public pressure, political complaints, or routine procedure. The vast majority of investigations into election fraud claims, historically, in states across the country, close without finding evidence of anything resembling the scale being alleged. So where does that leave us at this stage? With a claim, a formal denial from the state's top legal officer, and an open federal investigation that has not yet produced public findings. Three different things. It would be inaccurate in either direction to treat any one of those as proof of the others. Why mail-in voting keeps becoming the target. This isn't the first time President Trump has raised alarms about mail-in voting. Not by a long shot. He's made similar claims for years, across multiple elections, in multiple states, long before California's June primary became the latest flashpoint. There's an irony in this particular case that's worth sitting with for a moment, because it complicates the narrative on both sides. ABC News reported that Trump himself voted by mail in a Florida special election earlier this year. When asked about it, a White House spokesperson described that as a, quote, paraphrased, common-sense exception appropriate for someone who, while officially a Florida resident, primarily lives at the White House. At the same time, the administration maintains its broader opposition to universal mail voting, arguing it's highly susceptible to fraud. Critics call that an inconsistency, using the system when it's convenient, while campaigning against it everywhere else. Supporters argue there's a real and meaningful distinction between a specifically requested absentee ballot for a documented circumstance, like residing primarily out of state, and a system like California's, which automatically mails every registered voter a ballot regardless of whether they asked for one. And here's the thing that's actually a legitimate, substantive policy debate. Should states automatically mail a ballot to every voter? Or should voters need to request one? Should signature verification standards be tightened or standardized? Should the counting window after Election Day be shortened? Reasonable people across the political spectrum disagree on these questions. Election administration experts have proposed reforms in both directions for years, and many of those proposals have nothing to do with Trump specifically. But there's a meaningful difference between debating mail voting policy on the merits and declaring outright, without evidence, that a specific election was stolen while the count is still actively underway. One of those is democratic debate, the kind every healthy political system needs. The other risks undermining public confidence in a result before that result has even been finalized, and that has consequences regardless of which party benefits from the eventual outcome. How this fits a larger pattern? It's worth zooming out here, because California isn't happening in a vacuum. NBC News reporting described what's unfolding in California as, quote, paraphrased, a perfect storm, a combination of California's mail voting rules and a set of unusually competitive, high-profile primary races that together made the state a magnet for fraud allegations from the right. Election experts quoted in that reporting warned this could be a preview of what's coming nationally this fall. In the November midterms, closer races nationwide, paired with the reality that close races simply take longer to count accurately, could create dozens of similar flashpoints across multiple states simultaneously. That matters because the dynamic isn't really about California specifically. California is simply where the conditions lined up first. A huge number of registered voters, heavy reliance on mail ballots, and races close enough that final numbers actually mattered. If that pattern repeats in swing states this November, where the political stakes are even higher and the margins even tighter, the volume of these disputes could scale up dramatically. Understanding how this played out in California right now is essentially a preview of the kind of disputes that may dominate news cycles for months. The bigger fight. A lawsuit over election control? Here's a piece of this story that doesn't get nearly enough attention in the day-to-day headlines, and it's arguably bigger than any single primary race. California Attorney General Rob Bonta is co-leading a multi-state lawsuit, joined by more than 20 other state attorneys general and at least one sitting governor, challenging a recent executive order from the Trump administration related to federal election policy. According to reporting on the lawsuit, that executive order attempts to restrict voter eligibility rules and mail voting procedures to lists pre-approved at the federal level. The states suing argue this oversteps federal authority. Their core legal argument is that the Constitution gives states, not the federal government, the primary authority to administer their own elections, and that an executive order attempting to override state-level voting procedures would force a rapid, chaotic overhaul of systems that have been in place for years, creating confusion right as a major election cycle approaches. This is the part worth slowing down for, because it reframes everything we just discussed. The California fraud claims aren't happening in isolation, disconnected from any broader context. They're unfolding at the exact same time as a much larger legal and political fight over a foundational question: who actually controls how elections are run in this country? Washington, or the 50 individual states? That question predates this administration and will outlast it. It's been debated in various forms since the founding of the country, But the intensity of that debate right now, combined with a high-profile state election under public scrutiny, means whatever happens in this lawsuit could shape election administration nationwide for years to come. However you come down on the fraud claim specifically, this lawsuit is arguably the real stakes hiding behind the headlines, not just one governor's race or one mayoral primary, the future structure of who runs American elections. Visual, voices from both sides. It's worth hearing how the direct stakeholders in this race have responded, because their reactions tell you something about how this is actually playing out on the ground. Xavier Becerra, one of the leading Democratic candidates for governor, responded directly to Trump's claims on social media, framing the president's rhetoric as an attempt to undermine confidence in California's elections, and pointedly noting Trump's history of losing in the state. Tom Steyer, running third in that same race, took a quieter, more procedural tone, emphasizing simply that every ballot would be counted and asking for patience while democracy, in his words, was given time to work. On the Republican side, gubernatorial frontrunner Steve Hilton notably did not repeat Trump's specific fraud allegations. Instead, he called for structural reforms, things like making Election Day a holiday and clearer rules around mail ballot requests, while stopping short of alleging the election itself had been stolen. That distinction matters. It shows that even within the same party, there's a meaningful difference between a candidate pushing for procedural reform and a claim that the current count is fraudulent. Hilton's approach suggests the fraud allegations aren't universally embraced even among Trump-aligned California Republicans. California Democratic Party Chair Rusty Hicks dismissed the claims outright as baseless, while Governor Gavin Newsom's press office posted a blunt rebuttal, accusing the president of, quote, paraphrased, lying about California again. So, across the spectrum, you have flat denial, you have calls for patience, and you have at least one prominent Republican candidate choosing reform language over fraud language. That spread of reactions is itself useful information for viewers trying to gauge how seriously to weigh the original claims. So where does all of this actually leave us? Election experts have warned that what happened in California could be a genuine preview of the fall midterms. Closer races, slower counts in high-population states, and louder fraud claims whenever results don't arrive as quickly as people expect. That's a warning worth taking seriously. Regardless of which side of the aisle you sit on, if every slow vote count becomes an automatic trigger for fraud accusations without evidence to support them, that erodes trust in election results broadly, not just for one party, but for the system as a whole. And public trust, once damaged at scale, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. At the same time, it would be a mistake to treat every concern about election administration as automatically illegitimate. Investigations exist precisely so that real problems, if they exist, can be uncovered through evidence rather than dismissed through assumption. If the DOJ and FBI eventually find something concrete, the public deserves to know clearly and promptly. And if they find nothing, that outcome deserves exactly as much coverage and attention as the original allegations received, which, historically, it often does not. The honest, unembellished answer right now, as of this recording, is this. There are claims, there are formal denials from the state's senior legal and elections officials, and there's an open federal investigation that has not yet produced public findings. Anyone telling you with full confidence how this story definitively ends in either direction is telling you more about their own politics than about the documented facts. What we do know with certainty is this. The vote counting process played out under the same rules that have governed California elections for years. The lawsuit challenging federal election authority is still pending in court, and the broader question of who controls American elections is far from settled. This is a story that will keep developing. We'll be tracking it as new information comes in. New information comes in. New information